Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Arham. So here I'm going to explain chapter 10 and the title is the production and reception of culture. Okay, on this chapter there is one important point that I'm going to explain and is the study of media effect. Theoretical interest in the production and reception of culture can be traced back to communications research in the middle decades of the 20th century. Communication is commonly seen as a process involving a sender, receiver, and a message. A central theme in mass media research has been the exploration of the relationships between these elements. In particular, there has been considerable debate about the relative power of the sender and the receiver to determine the meanings of messages. During the 20th century, there was a general shift away from models that gave primary power to senders, for example, its media institutions, and toward those which emphasize the ability of audiences to influence the interpretation of messages. And the rise of the new technologies of television, radio, and cinema during the 20th century corresponded with the emergence of the mass society hypothesis. This model was adopted by those on both the left and the right. It suggests that industrialization and urbanization had created a mass of more or less undifferentiated consumers and citizens. The theory of hypodermic model, as it suggests that elites were able to construct meanings which were then injected wholesale into the mass. Another name is the bullet model. The theory was most often applied in the context of non-democratic regimes like Hitler's Germany, where an efficient propaganda machine was perceived to be whipping up support for the Nazis via radio and cinema. These kinds of models were challenged by early research findings on media effects. Study on media effects aim to find out what kinds of impact the media are actually having on their audience. The most important early investigations were by Paul Lazarsfeld and others, beginning with an exploration of the American presidential election of 1940. The findings of Lazarsfeld's various projects suggested that the exposure to radio and print media had very little direct impact on voting behavior. What was important was the impact of opinion leaders. There was people like the head of the household, union officials in the workplace, community figures, and so on. They tended to be the highest consumers of the media. A two-step flow of communication took place in which the opinion leader would interpret information coming from the mass media and shape the meanings that others made from them. The overall finding was that personal influence, that is Katz and Lazarus felt on 1956, was very important in shaping the way that messages were received. Communications coming from outside of a group or community were filtered through interpersonal and institutional. The kind of perspective advocated by Gitlin and others has come to be known as agenda setting. The idea here, to provide a colloquial summary, is that the media cannot tell people what to think, but it can tell them what to think about. It was claimed that the media was powerful because it could foreground some issues as important while marginalizing or ignoring others. This understanding was popular with those on the left who saw certain issues. For example, the international arms trade, third world poverty, illegal CIA practices, and the environment. Never making it into public discourse thanks to the domination of the media by capital. The media could also become important because it shaped common sense thinking, symbolic frames, and epistemologies. Imagine, for example, a televised debate between two presidential candidates. Lazarus Ford would set out to look for a shift in voting intentions among the audience. An important variation on the agenda setting them was Elizabeth Noel Newman's theory of the sub-spiral of silence. The idea here is that people fear being isolated. Once an issue is treated in a particular way in the media, it takes a good deal of courage to speak out against the orthodoxy and rise social isolation. The spiral of silence kicks in as one opinion becomes endlessly repeated and the perceived cost of speaking out grows. An example of this was British media discourse over the death of Princess Diana, Princess Diana in 1997. The media ran stories about universal grief among the people and spoke endlessly of their deep love for her. The views of the many people, probably the majority, who did not share this opinion were never aired. Those who did raise them in public were sometimes subjected to harassment and hate mail. For those people who felt coolly toward Diana, it was prudent simply to keep silent. During the 19 during the 1980s during the 1980s, however, reception studies were also putting power back into the hands of receivers. The most important tests were audience ethnographies. These were usually based on focus group, interview, or panel methodologies, and in full exploring the way that diverse social groups read particular medial text. Most often, television programs return now to that literature. That's all what I'm going to explain. Thanks for. I'm sorry if there is some mistakes from me or some missing words or anything else. And thanks for watching and assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.